Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Australian Academy of Liturgy Victoria chapter. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our speaker for this meeting, Alice Watson. Alice joins us from Oxford, where she recently moved to become chaplain at the Queen's College. Today's presentation draws on Alice's recent published work, The ReRitualising of the Transition to Motherhood within the Church of England, which came out through Joint Liturgical Studies earlier this year. We're very fortunate that Alice responded to my approach on Twitter and didn't think me some liturgical oddity. And so it's good to have you with us, Alice. Alice's presentation forms a really strong complement to the discussion we enjoyed last September from Mel Wally when she came and spoke with us about complex pregnancies. Alice's paper explores issues that are really quite interesting in the life of the Academy of Liturgy, given our strong involvement in liturgical renewal over the last 50 or 60 years. And it really throws a light on perhaps some gaps that have come from the right desire to renew liturgy. But I guess to use a hackneyed phrase, there are times where the baby has somewhat gone astray with the bathwater. Alice's paper abstract is as follows. In cultures worldwide, rituals and rites of passage are used to mark life's transitions, from birth to coming of age to death. However, universally, it is matrescence, the transition to motherhood, which is the least ritualised of the great human traditions. The modern Church of England is no different. The once expected service of thanksgiving for women after childbirth, commonly called the Churching of Women, a mouthful from the 1662 Book of Common Prayer, has fallen out of use, perhaps replaced in part by the common worship service of thanksgiving for the gift of a child. However, here the focus is firmly on the child and not the mother. And within the Anglican tradition, I think we would find a similar emphasis in a prayer book for Australia, which came out in 1995. The modern day woman is left wondering where she fits in, on one hand participating in God's creative work, and yet seemingly forgotten in the church. Alice's work offers resources and liturgies which can be used with those becoming parents in a variety of settings. Alice, it's a joy to welcome you. So over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. It's really, really lovely to be here. I watched back to Mel's presentation and I really liked it. So I'm glad that you're here, Mel, because I just wanted to say that. So yeah, it's early. Well, it's not early in the morning. It's about 9:30 now here in the UK. So other side of the world. I've got my dog just down here. So if you hear any dog noises, it's my dog. But hopefully she'll be good. I'm just going to share my screen with you. I've put together an outline presentation. It's really just to keep me on track more than anything. And there'll be points for discussion where we can kind of all chip in if that's what people want to do as well. So hopefully this is going to be okay. That's right. So yeah. So the title of my thesis, which then came on to be this JLS paper, is the re-ritualisation of the transition to motherhood. And I think that gives an acknowledgement that this is something which has been counted as important within the life of the church in the past and is still important to some people. Some people still undergo the old BCP service, the Churching of Women, and hold that to be quite important to them. So it's not to kind of say that the slate has been completely wiped and that we no longer have any of the old rites and rituals. It's more to look at how they can be applied to modern day parents. So this is an overview of what hopefully we'll discuss today. I don't actually know how long this is meant to be, maybe about kind of 40 minutes, is that about right? Or
40
and then
minutes,
question.
40 minutes is good.
Okay, lovely. So if it's a bit shorter, we'll just have more questions or something. So to begin with, I'll just give a bit of my story, and then we'll look at the transition to motherhood and whether or not we can frame it as a rite of passage. And then we'll look at some liturgical responses, which just includes a few kind of initial thoughts on the prayer book for Australia service as well. And then we'll just have a look through some of the sample liturgies, which people can build upon and kind of explore how we might work these sort of things in our own contexts. So this work came out of my own experience. It's very much a work of autoethnography. It comes out of my story with my own difficult birth of my first child, and then my kind of ensuing spiritual, I guess, time of struggle, which came afterwards with not knowing who I was anymore, with not knowing how to be a mother, with not being able to match up the joy that I felt at new motherhood with some of the more difficult things which had happened to me during childbirth. I now know that I was suffering from a form of birth trauma, and my ongoing work will look at how liturgy can shape and adapt our trauma response. And so it kind of really does build upon this. But I wanted to acknowledge at the beginning that this comes out of a place of trauma. I was physically and emotionally damaged by childbirth, as a lot of women are. Here in the UK, it's estimated that up to a third of women have what they would describe as a traumatic delivery, so whatever scale that might be. And it's not really something that's discussed very much before childbirth and afterwards. We rightly here in the UK have quite a watchful eye on people after birth to check for things such as postpartum depression and things like that. But I think that trauma is different from depression, and that's not often picked up in the same way. So personally, I wasn't depressed. I was very happy, but I couldn't understand why I was having symptoms, which I know now could be trauma symptoms, without fitting into this kind of depressed or postpartum anxiety box. It was something different. And I found that when I went back to church, or at the point, it was before I was ordained, I went to a kind of traditional English country church, as you could imagine it, probably, from things like Father Brown or similar programs like that. And yeah, obviously everybody was overjoyed to have a new baby in the midst, but it wasn't really known how to speak of what had happened without kind of being awkward. So I'm going to just read a little bit from the introduction just to set the sort of scene, because it's better than my ramblings. So I say this work is partly one of autoethnography, and it's here that my own story, my own grappling with birth and motherhood, and my own search for blessing begins. In a hospital bed after a traumatic birth, gazing upon blood-stained hands and wondering whose blood it was, my own or my son's, and how strange it was that now there was a difference. And how that difference, that separating, would mark me for life, as one whose own body had been broken, as one who had glimpsed death to give life, and mostly left wondering why there was nothing I could seek from my own church community, why there was no ritual for this, no rich source of women's history, no liturgy, no balm of healing that I could access. I called my priest, and he came to my house and he blessed me, and I suppose in a way I was churched, but I didn't know what else to do. The next few months revealed that I was no means alone in wrestling with this shifting identity and in wanting to somehow mark or ritualize the occasion of matrescence. And so my work draws upon my kind of experience as a participant observer and my lived experience with myself and the women with whom I was lucky enough to share those early years of motherhood. Okay, so that's a bit of a kind of overview of where my work has come out of. And in researching this, I was really surprised at the lack of resources and the lack of scholarly work coming out of the Christian tradition, which looks at these things. There's a lot coming out of perhaps a more kind of New Age tradition, a kind of modern spirituality, which explores becoming a mother as a spiritual experience. And there's obviously a little bit from a medical point of view, but there's not much theological work that has been done upon pregnancy and childbirth. And that's surprising, I think, because it's something that touches every single one of us. Like, none of us are kind of people that have just arrived on earth. We have all been born at some point. And I think, given that our faith is an incarnational one, I think that we should pay a lot more theological observation around what might be going on in people's experience of childbirth and how we can use that to connect ourselves to God, because a lot of birthing metaphors are used in scripture, both in the Old and in the New Testaments. And I just think it's an underexplored area of theology. So I think now in the last 5 years, quite a lot more work is being done in this area. So that's really good to see. So firstly, matrescence is a word coined in, I think, the 1970s in a psychology frame to express what people have always known, I suppose, is a transition when one becomes a mother. And so matrescence, I guess a bit like adolescence, is used. It just means becoming a mother. So one of the kind of main scholars around looking at rites of passage is an anthropologist called Ronald Grimes. And he describes a rite of passage as moving through a dangerous zone, negotiating it safely and memorably. So it's about undergoing something which causes some danger, whether that's emotionally, spiritually, physically, and then it's marking that and committing it to memory somehow. Going through a rite of passage changes us as a person. If you think about becoming a parent, you weren't a parent, and then at some point during that journey, you become a parent. And that's not necessarily at the point of birth. Different people mark their time of matrescence or patrescence or becoming a parent at different points along that journey. And so we want to ask, is childbirth a rite of passage, and does it require some ritual? Grimes would suggest not. He says it's similar to toothbrushing in that it's a natural act and a repetitive act that we would just do naturally. I mean, as someone that also has ADHD, I'm not entirely sure how natural toothbrushing is, because I do need to remind myself quite a lot to brush my teeth, more than you'd expect a woman in her 30s to have to do. And I think that childbirth is different from toothbrushing in that nowhere around the world is childbirth merely a physiological act. Nowhere is it just how you would, if you were a vet, you'd assist perhaps a cow giving birth, and that's a physiological act. We don't know inside the mind of animals what they do to mark birth, but I'd probably argue it's not even purely physiological outside of the human experience. So there's nowhere around the world where birth is not marked in some way. And so if we think about today's modern births and pregnancies, what are the ritual acts that we undergo? We might not recognize them as ritual at first, but I think things such as our reticence to tell people that we're expecting a child until we have a scan picture, and then how we choose to tell people has an element of ritual about it as well. If you've ever seen one of the many gender reveal things, which are often all over Facebook or YouTube, then you'll know that there's a lot of ritual around that, how we tell people that we are thinking that our child will be male or will be female. And then there's also things such as when we buy our first things related to having a baby. Baby showers are a big thing now, when people will want to gift new parents certain things. And there are big elements of ritual around that as well. So I think we can say that childbirth has many ritual elements to it. Traditionally, like the idea of wetting the baby's head when the dad and his friends would go out for a drink afterwards, that's a ritual act to mark the safe delivery of the child. and to mark the dad's new status as the dad of a living child who's here. But I do think that with the medicalisation of childbirth, a lot of what are ritual elements have been transferred into more medical elements, and so we don't see them for perhaps what we are. Here in the UK, we have a 6-week check after childbirth. It happens at 6 weeks, and it's to check on the person that's given birth physically, mentally. It's a check up on the baby, but it's a check of the woman more than the baby. The baby gets checked more times. And I don't think it's coincidence that 6-week point is exactly the same point at which a woman would have been churched in the old tradition. So a woman would be churched at 6 weeks, about a 40-day kind of period after birth. And now we're not churched, but we are medically checked. And it's interesting that after churching, a woman could be expected to go back to her household duties, which would include her sexual duties. And during the medicalisation and the check after birth, that's normally when they'll ask you about contraception and things like that. So it still has the same kind of expectation that you have the 6-week period, and then after that, you're kind of cleared to go fell running, if that's something that you do, or something like that. So it still has that kind of point, which is a bit of a hangover from history. And so in my view, these are the key dimensions of any ritual. So if we're assuming that childbirth in some way requires ritual, whether that is spiritual, Christian, or whether it's purely secular, if we are to start building Christian rituals or to start reusing the old rituals which we've inherited, then these are the dimensions which I believe should be in a ritual. And they're not in order of importance or anything. So one is to honour the work and the experience of the person that has given birth. So it's to say that this is something which has happened, the safe delivery, if you will, of the child and the work of the mother. And so it kind of fits with wider pastoral concerns about how new families and mothers are welcomed into church. Perhaps it could address issues such as where family rooms are placed in the church, how kind of central children are seen, and how much of a nuisance children might be to the life of the church, whether that's stated or not. And I just had another little bit to read, which explains how sorry, I did think I marked it, but I probably didn't, sorry. Yeah, so I wrote, in my case, I was no longer fully able to rest and enjoy the liturgical high masses that had been my place of solace and joy. I was forever feeling guilty for my unsettled infant, and I was worried that I was somehow disturbing the peace and the holiness. And I would pace the churchyard with him, waiting for the chime of the Sanctus bell, marking my own self-imposed permission to re-enter. In this way, I was deeply in need of reincorporation, of a place within my community which I could accept and in which I could blossom. And so I go on to argue that part of these traditional services are to reincorporate people who have given birth within the church, to say that this is a place where you are welcome as you are. I think it's a wider thing about what is spoken about as well. And in wider society, I think the common view, if you've had a difficult birth, is just to say, okay, that happened, your baby's here, at least the baby is healthy, aren't you lucky, that kind of thing. And women want to think that as well, like we want to be happy that our babies have arrived safely, especially women who have gone through experiences of loss in the past, especially when there is so much to celebrate around the birth of a child. And this moves on to the second point, which is acknowledging that it's a really ambiguous time, that we hold joy and sadness, celebration and trauma alongside each other, and that the Christian tradition has so much to offer and to speak into this experience of wanting different things at the same time. And so making spaces for exploration of fear and lament are really important, I think, and being able to hold what's happened in a sacred space and to be able to be sad as well as to be happy. And then the third point is obviously in order to create a Christian ritual, we need to primarily be there to worship and to give thanks, to celebrate what God has done through me, to celebrate God's creation, to celebrate the birthing of God's new kingdom and new age into our world, and to celebrate the birthing of a new child as well, which is obviously a great occasion for rejoicing. And it can be a shift in how we relate to God and church. Even outside of church settings, pregnancy and childbirth are a spiritual time for women. Studies published in journals such as the Journal of Midwifery around the spirituality and the spiritual needs of mothers point out that this is really a time when big questions are brought to the fore, questions of identity, questions of the meaning and purpose of life. And so for the church to not see that in a way, I think is really missing out on the missional potential as well as the healing potential which the church has to offer to new parents. And then that's just to kind of tie things up to say that this is a liminal time, and it should be a ritual aims to move somebody through something. It has an end point, and it aims to move you out of this kind of transitional period and into a new established way of being. So it's very much a threshold ministry, similar to funeral ministry and things like that. And so I just kind of thought that probably by now I'd need a break from talking. So if there's any kind of points of discussion or anything that anyone wants to raise around the concept of rites of passage and ritualizing and childbirth, then yeah, this is a chance for that now, if that's okay. We can just keep going and have questions at the end, if that would be like preferable. What do you think?
If anybody's got something they want to jump in and say, please unmute and say.
Otherwise, we can just keep going. I'm happy to. Okay, so in the next section then, we're going to look at some of the liturgical responses. So there's three main ones. So apologies for the Church of England focus on this. So the first one is looking at common worship. And then we'll look at a bit more of our tradition that we kind of share, and we'll land upon the BCP, but I'll be touching upon different rites that were in place, which led down to different prayer book rites as well. And then I had a nice look at the prayer book for Australia service at the end. So obviously my points around that are much less formed, but just to start off by saying that I thought it was a really beautiful service, and it definitely avoided some of the what I consider to be the pitfalls of the common worship service. So the actual academic work that I decided to do came out of looking at the service Thanksgiving for a child, or Thanksgiving for the gift of a child, and wondering where I would find references to the mother in this. There are a lot of references to parents, which is really good. And then in the additional prayers, there are prayers for the child, obviously need to be there, for the home and the family, including the wider family. There's prayers for the father, obviously very important, really kind of bringing into the foreground images of Joseph, an earthly father to Jesus. So I thought that was really beautiful. There are prayers for grandparents and other relatives, for brothers and sisters. So you get the impression this is really a flexible service, which is looking at including whoever has turned up to this service. There's prayers for health workers, obviously really important, especially if the child's undergone things like that. There's prayers for if the child's adopted and if the child has special needs. And then there's prayers for after a difficult birth. It says, loving Father, you have turned pain into joy by the birth of this child. May this mother, remembering no longer her anguish, trust you in all things. As she asks for all she would receive, May she discover that in you her joy is complete, through Jesus, your Son. This is the only explicit reference to the mother in this service. And as you'll have heard, it frames the mother's experience and only kind of raises the whole not existence, but the only kind of need for prayer for the mother is after a difficult birth. And the prayer is that the mother would remember no longer her anguish and that pain would be turned into joy. As a mother who had experienced a difficult birth, there is no way I could forget my anguish. But there's also no way at times I could remember my anguish. There are large parts of the experience that are missing, which I won't remember fully ever, which are gone to me. And so I think this is a simplistic prayer. I think it could really be useful in some cases, but pastorally, I would explore this with any mother before saying it, because it is, in my view, it's begging the question that if you cannot do these things, where is God and how has this prayer been answered? And so this is what where this work came out of, is reading this service and seeing that I wasn't sure how to forget what had happened, and thinking that there must be something a bit more multi-layered that could be used. And so it's unclear, and I've delved back through the very fun liturgical records of the Church of England, and looking back through various liturgical committee meetings. And it's never stated, and I've spoken to people that were in those meetings, that this is explicitly to replace the service of the Churching of Women, although that did drop out at the time of the alternative service booklet and has not been carried over. So one could assume that it's there to replace it, but also it's there, I think, to meet a modern need or a modern response, that it's not the done thing or the kind of thing that you have to do anymore to get your child baptized. So I think it's seeking to meet a need for people that want to have their child recognized, want some form of naming ceremony perhaps, but don't go straight in for baptism. Just to do a bit of kind of back of the envelope research, I asked on Twitter yesterday about people who'd received this service or people who'd undergone this service or done this service. And of the kind of 60 people that responded, about equal amounts say that they haven't seen the service or that they've seen it in place of baptism. And then a much smaller amount say it's seen as a welcome or a naming service. And then an even smaller, so just 6%, say it's in place of churching. So I don't believe that it is replacing the service of Churching of Women. And you'll see in the long spiel that when Kieran read out the title, that the thanksgiving of women after childbirth, commonly called the Churching of Women, the shift has gone from the thanksgiving of women, expressing the agency of the woman and her ability to give thanks, to the thanksgiving for the birth of a child, for the gift of a child. So the switch really there is giving thanks for something that has happened, away from a woman coming to give her thanks and in response to be churched. So there's, as I said, no explicit or distinct mention of the mother, and I've just spoken a bit about how I don't think that the prayers are entirely adequate. I think it is, and it can be, a good service. So I am a kind of guide parent, for want of a better word, to my not quite goddaughter who had this service, and it was a beautiful occasion. And she will choose whether baptism is something that she wants to follow and to make her own commitments when she's older, which I think is a beautiful thing. But regarding the need to mark the transition to motherhood, I don't think that this service quite does enough. So then if we look at prayer book tradition and what came down to us in the 1662 prayer book. So this begins with, "For as much as it hath pleased Almighty God of his goodness to give you safe deliverance and have preserved you in the great danger of childbirth, you shall therefore give hearty thanks unto God." So the focus here is on the person, the mother, coming to church and giving thanks. Obviously, because this is the 17th century, then it is the priest that says the psalms of thanksgiving, so there's a choice that they can do. But there are places where the mother would answer. So, O Lord, save this woman thy servant. And the answer would be, who putteth her trust in thee. Be thou to her a strong tower. And she would say, from the face of her enemy. O Lord, hear our prayer. And the response, let our cry come unto thee. So I think people often kind of mislabel the BCP and this service in that it is a kind of sexist or outdated or even misogynistic service, which is done to cleanse the woman. And by doing that, I don't think that they see the agency that the woman had in this service, which I will talk a little bit more about in a minute. But just to focus a bit on that idea of cleansing, I don't think in this form that we've received it in the BCP, this is still a service of cleansing. The kind of ideas of purification have been stripped out, mostly at the Reformation, not because of so much what they represented about childbirth, but just because they were viewed to be like popish or superstitious in that way. So it's not really saying anything about childbirth. And I think that anybody who will have lived through this time would still know that it's a part of a tradition which suggests that there is some sort of, whether you want to call it reincorporation or whether you want to call it purification, some sort of marking that shift needs to happen. But rubrics for purification and thanksgiving, which are the two arms of this service, are seen in prayer books from the 11th century. And they're definitely more liminal and more purificating before that time. So the York Rite, so in the medieval times, it's the York Rite and the Sarum Rite. They're the two main rites here in England. The York Rite would have the woman at this service, she wouldn't receive communion, she'd receive blessed bread, but then she would return to church the next time she would naturally take communion. So she's still in this liminal stage. And the use of churching pews reflects that. Most churches of this period would have a separate pew where women who are about to be churched would sit. And interestingly, that's also a place where midwives would sit as well. So reflecting that there's something liminal about childbirth, something almost dangerous, that means it needs to be marked out. It could be a place of honor, the churching pew, but it could also be a place of distinction and isolation. The services in those early, so perhaps 14th century services, would be marked at the Lich Gate, so at the gate of the churchyard, where also the kind of the deliverance section of baptisms would happen. So it really is a sense of progression and a sense of coming from a place of spiritual outsideness back into church. By the time the BCP, the 1662, comes down to us, there's no churching pew talked about. It just says the woman shall kneel down in some convenient place. So it's really kind of stripped out those kind of journeying things to it. But the scholar Joanna Pearce says that it's a really thickly textured ritual. It has public, private, and official meanings. So its official meanings is it is the duty of the priest to church the women under his care. In some places, it's the duty of the midwife to bring the women to be churched. In the UK and in other European countries, it really does differ, but in France at least, midwives are ecclesially appointed, so it's a church position, and one of the duties is to bring the woman to be churched. It's a public statement. It says that the woman is now back into society. She no longer is confined, so women after birth would stay in their houses. I think it sounds like quite a nice time, really. You'd stay either in your bed or in your house, and people would bring your meals to you, they'd bring your child to you. You have a world of women. They would be called your god sibs, and that's because they would be responsible with your husband for taking your child for baptism. They would stand in place of you and take your child to baptism. They would bring back something which is called the chrism cloth, which is the baby's cloth from baptism. And then at the time of your churching, you would present that as a sign of thanksgiving. So it's linking to the new life explored in baptism, given and linking that to the new physical life of being a mother and of being brought safely a child into the world. Interestingly, like gossips is where we get the word gossips from, because these women would go round the various women who had given birth, they'd go to the bridal showers, they'd go everywhere, and they'd bring those interesting little bits of women's information back to the women who were confined. So I like that. It's a church role being a gossip. And then privately as well, it would mark a woman's return to church and her own personal thanksgiving to God and her receipt of communion again. She would be physically in communion. And so I think the focus when we look back at the BCP, and when we look, especially given that this service or services like it were being carried out right up until the 1960s here in the UK, almost as an expected requirement. So my mum was churched when I was born, so that's in the 80s. She said that the priest or somebody just came round and said, who wants to be churched? And then there was a service right in the hospital. That's from a Roman Catholic tradition, so a little bit different. But when we look back, it's often too easy to say that this is something done to women who were considered unclean. And it really is taking away the actual focus that, although there might have been elements of that which were fitting with the society of the time, it's something done for women and by women. Although obviously the priestly role was a male one, the offering of the women's offerings, they would bring particular flowers to lay at the feet of a statue of Mary. They would bring, as I said, the chrism cloth, so tokens from the birth and from the baptism. This is the tying up of those two occasions. So I think that there's a lot of underlying symbolism which is still really, really relevant today. I think that in most cases, the language of the BCP probably wouldn't fit well with women, especially women who don't have much experience with church. But I definitely think that what's going on behind this service is still really, really important, and that we don't have anything like it in the church today. So just looking a little bit at the 1995 service, which Kieran was kind enough to send me, because you would not believe how difficult it is to get hold of these things. Even my Australian friends, I was like, have you got the Australian prayer book? And they were like, I've got this, the 1976 version. I was like, no, that's not what I need. So that's good. So I really like this service because it's a two-way liturgy. It has involvement from the parents in there. The parents get to give their own thanksgiving, and during the service they get to respond and to say a little bit about what God has done. And remember that one of the things that I thought was important about ritual was the ability to name what God has done through you. So I thought that was really nice. And I also just very simplistically loved that in the additional prayers there were different prayers for the mother. So there's for a mother after the delivery of a child, which I just love because it has one of my favorite lines of scripture in it. So, "O God, like a mother who comforts her children, you strengthen us in times of need. And thank you for sustaining this woman through pregnancy and labor. Continue to care and provide for her in the days that lie ahead. Give her understanding and compassion in the nurture of her children, so that her love may be a reflection of your love." I really love that. I think it's such a beautiful prayer. I think it does everything that a prayer of ritual and of rite of passage should do. It gives thanks for what has happened. It expresses that there may be some need there, the strengthen us in times of need. It acknowledges that ambiguity. And it prepares a mother for the task of motherhood, which is ahead of her in the compassion and the nurture of children. And it ties in the work of the mother to the mothering work of God, which I really like. And then there's also a prayer for a sick mother, which I like a lot more than the prayer for the difficult birth, because again, it's more ambiguous in its nature, and it doesn't ask just for the ability to forget, which I'm not sure really is something that we can ever truly ask for in this life. I think that obviously the next life, all things that are things of pain and sadness will be wiped away, but here on earth, I think it's too simplistic to ask for that at the moment. So yeah, I really liked this service. I think those prayers are really beautiful, and I will definitely look to use them in future cases in my own ministry. Although as a college chaplain, we don't get to see much childbirth, so it will be a strange. It's a 5-year period, so it's not forever. And then I had a look also at some things from the book Australian Anglicans Worship. And I just thought that this line here, Thanksgiving for a child is in large part, an opportunity waiting to happen. And I really think that that's so important. One of the biggest areas where churches do such good missional work is around parent and toddler groups. And that's a way that I know so many people and my own friends in my own church communities have entered a church through a toddler group. And I think if we can combine that with pastoral and liturgical care for the new parents, particularly for the mother or the person who has given birth, I think that's a really lovely opportunity. Like linking a bit to what Mel said in her presentation last time, part of my work in my parishes before I left for university life was to set up a big Wave of Light service to mark people who have lost children in pregnancy or shortly after birth. And the way that that was received, and so well received, with women from church and women outside of church, I just know that there's also a place to look at the kind of, not the shadow side, but the things that aren't explored in childbirth and aren't named. I think just as perhaps 20 years ago, or even now, we don't name loss as much, I think these days, unless you are with people who you know have gone through things that are similar, you don't want to talk about it. You feel as if you can't talk to people that are pregnant, because why would you tell them what could happen? And you can't talk to people who appear to be living happily and have had gone through good births, although we know that a good proportion of people don't have that. So you do really feel isolated. So I think that being involved in a world where you can meet people who have gone through similar things and also explore what that means for your faith and for your relationship with God can only be good. So I just popped in a little point of discussion, but if we want to leave it to the end, the only bit left I've got to do on the presentation is to look at some of the liturgies, or probably just the main liturgy that I came up with as part of this work. So the bit that's missing, I guess, the jigsaw piece so far is looking at what spirituality general mothers, so by general I mean mothers who don't have a church tradition, which is a vast majority of people here in the UK, and looking at some of the spiritual things that they do, and it is remarkable. I think most people who go through this time have some spiritual aspect to their birth, whether that be something like mindful birth, or whether it be hypnobirthing, whether it's engaging the services of an alternative midwife or doula, or even up until some of the after birth rituals or the mother's circles which happen. Something that I had, and which I'll read a little bit, I don't really know why I did this, it was funny, was a closing the bones ceremony. So if we read, a quick search of the internet reveals a wide variety of spiritual and ritual practices available to pregnant women and new mothers, from the fairly common hypnobirthing or mindfulness to full blessing way services. And obviously this carries a whole load of inappropriate appropriation of other people's cultures into our British culture here. So some of the things that you will see if you Google blessing way services are not of our culture here, and I think very inappropriate and shouldn't be appropriated in that way, but they do. New motherhood is an absolute minefield for alternative spiritualities, which are taken from a very deep spirituality of one culture and put onto a not so deep spirituality of our culture here. But they reflect, for whatever reasons it's done, people's need and people's crying out for blessing. And I think that people feel, the way that people would feel more at home in having a service drawn from Indigenous cultures of other countries, rather than reaching out to their own church community, is a bit of an kind of indictment of where we are today. But that's there we are. And then more obscure rituals, which don't seem to have come from anywhere, such as closing the bones. And these may form part of an entry to a community which people are seeking. So 3 months postpartum and struggling with physical recovery as well as spiritual confusion, along with some other women, I undertook a closing the bones ceremony. It's a ritual designed to, quote, honour a woman who has just given birth. It's described thus. The closing the bones is a way to support a woman's recovery after childbirth, a way to celebrate the amazing abilities of her body, and a way to create a moment of stillness, of meditative peace and reflection in the roller coaster of emotions of new motherhood. It says it's a postnatal ritual. It is a ceremony. So it's really saying that it's a ceremony and a ritual that is there for people who are in this place of either physical discomfort or spiritual discomfort or confusion. It obviously it didn't fulfill what I hoped it would fulfill in my own life, but it's, I think, testament to where I was at that time and that search for some spiritual source and comfort. And the women that I did it alongside, people who I'd met through the journey, were by and large perhaps culturally Christian, but did not have a kind of Christian practice of their own. So I'm going to stop sharing this and just share a PDF which will quickly talk us through some liturgy, if I can get it to work. Okay, so if you can see this, and I'll just, is that big enough? Yeah, okay. Ooh, no, that's too big. Okay, so my work has 3 areas. So it has the liturgy of blessing for pregnant women, which I've done with some friends, which was absolutely a really lovely occasion. So this is a bit like a kind of blessing or a baby shower situation, which we'll just focus on the one at the end. And then it has blessings and prayers designed for labour, for pain, for women who are traumatized, and for new mothers. And then this is the main service, so which is designed for people that don't want the BCP service, basically. It's a liturgy of welcome in celebration and thanksgiving for a mother. So it opens with a welcoming liturgy and acknowledging that God is really here amongst us. I think when I wrote this, I was not aware of how to set out liturgy, so I should have played a few more nice little like returns in here, but here we go. So we're just pause and acknowledge God's presence here. And then as a reflection back to the links between, historic links between churching and baptism, even if it's not something that happens today, so most children are not baptized directly after birth, but it's reminding us that we are one in Christ. And from the 14th century traditions, the congregation are splashed with holy water, which I think is a nice physical symptom. And then there's obviously space for scripture. And then it's the receiving of the woman back into the church community. And just as in a baptism service, it's the communal kind of promise to the woman. Will you join with this woman in times of joy? Will you accompany her in times of struggle and confusion? And will you care for her and her family as God cares for us all? So it's finding a new incorporation, a new identity as a mother in this place. And then there's a time of anointing, a time of perhaps healing, and depending on tradition, prayer ministry in there as well. And then prayers, and then a simple blessing and dismissal. So I'm happy to share liturgies with anyone that wants them. Like, you don't have to get the JLS book to read them. So yeah, that was the output of my work, was to come up with liturgies, because I wanted it to be an offering to the church. I wanted it to be output focused, to make some good of things that had happened, and it to just be a way of opening up a discussion really about how I believe that this has been overlooked in recent liturgical reform, and how I think there's a real space and a desire for services such as this. And in my discussions with women afterwards, I definitely think that's the case, really. Both people who aren't from a church tradition would perhaps have a more gentle welcoming in a toddler group or something when they would arrive with their new baby. And then people who have a strong Christian faith often find that this is a real time of shaking of faith and spirituality. So I think something to help that transition is really, really needed and good. So I think that's the end of like the formal presentation, but if anyone has questions, then I'll do my best.
Thank you, Alice. That's been fascinating. Thank you so much. I know that there'll be a couple of people here who will have some reflections to offer. So I'd like to call on Mel or Michelle to speak first.
It's okay, I can go first. Thank you so much for sharing what you had there, Alice, and kind of as a segue from my experience and my last presentation as well. Birth trauma is another thing that hasn't been touched on properly, either pastorally or ritually in the church. So I thank you for bringing this to light and for writing about it and for your research and using your experience. And when we bring our own experience to it too, it brings another richness and another element to it as well. And so thank you so much for that. The prayer that prayer you're talking about, the prayer after a difficult birth that you read, that doesn't sit comfortably with me either. Which yeah, for me, when you read it and it's forgetting and moving to joy, we don't pray like that when we're doing a funeral, like forgetting, do we? No. But to me, it feels like, in a pastoral care sense, spiritual bypassing, or like praying a platitude in a sense. That's how I'd experience it, receiving it. And I've had a traumatic birth with my rainbow baby. That's how I would receive that prayer and gone, yeah. It's not a real journeying with the person in a chaplain sense either, is it?
No, like I think like at best it's kind of dismissive and like kind of never mind. But at worst it's like absolutely dangerous. If I'd have heard that when I was in my kind of depths of a traumatic condition, like unable to forget, but also unable to remember, I would have felt myself to be very far away from God, I think.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
really wondered where God was in the situation.
Yeah, that's right. And like, so in my notes I've write, shouldn't it be instead asking for God to enter into the journey with us? Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing too, when I was doing my research on my liturgy, Enriching Our Worship 5 does mention the churching of women in the sense of what happened when a baby was lost, when a baby died, even when it was early, when they could tell in those years, when they've lost a baby early, the churching of woman process would happen as well. So that was lost as well, in the sense of welcoming the mother back. And it provided a community, according to the pastoral notes in Enriching Our Worship 5, it provided a community of support around the mother as well.
Yeah, I think and I've been reflecting on this like in a really, really different context, obviously, because here in the UK we're in this, well, we're out of it now, the period of national mourning, and thinking about like what does it mean to have a fixed imposed time of mourning, and for good or for bad. But I think that part of churching, whether or not it's after like a healthy delivery of a child or whether it's after a loss, it gives that time and that space to come to terms a little bit with what has happened before you have to start telling your story or ignoring your story in public. And I think it just does give that bit of time. It's in my view, it's not so much like locking the woman away or whatever it was for that many days. It's more just saying that something worth reflecting on and worth sitting with has happened.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's about all. But yeah, it was all fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. We've got time for a couple of quick fire question answers. So if you'd like to be one of those, either unmute now and fire away or raise your hand. So Tom.
Thanks very much, Alice. I'm just struck by the complete deficiency of Catholic liturgical resources in this whole sphere of pregnancy and birth, and welcome. Just going back to the third liturgical service that you had devised, I may have missed it, but I just got the impression that it was still a liturgy for the woman. Does the woman have a voice? Does the mother have a voice in that service? Does she get a chance to, does she have agency in it? Or is it, I just got perhaps the wrong impression that the prayers were for her.
It's probably a super good point. Have a look. Yeah, so there's space for like storytelling and
Right.
for things to be brought in as well. So whether that's like symbolic things or yeah, but I think that's probably definitely a really good point, and it's designed to be flexible, but I think it probably could be more I guess, what's the word, more kind of telling or instructive as well, because I think that's, and given my work after this as well, so I finished this piece of work, goodness me, about 4 or 5 years ago now. So yeah, then my further work on like birth trauma since then has drawn out that a bit more as well. So yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice.
Colleen, you're next.
Thank you, Kieran. Many years ago, coming out of second wave feminism, a group of us in Women Church developed a liturgy for preparing to give birth, with the emphasis on women gathering with the woman about to give birth in order to enable the transition and to recognise that birth was both a letting go in the sense of the child that has been within now lives in the outer world, but also keeping boundaries and integrity and praying for the woman. So we published some of that in Women Church Journal, and I developed it even further in my own writing, but I've never published it. But we based that upon it was a liturgy of anticipation and preparation.
No, I think I might have read that. Yeah, no, I think I did read that in because before I wrote the thing, I prepared the pregnant blessings for basically during my time in theological college. As you can imagine, a number of women prepare to give birth in that situation. So we did a number of these things, and no, I definitely remember reading that work. So thank you. It's really I thought it was beautiful. Like so yeah, anticipation is such a good time. I think that's a really, that kind of in breath before the kind of out breath of labour is a really good thing, and a really like strong sense of the spirit indwelling within us at that time can really come out there as well. So.
And to bring us to a temporary conclusion, Tony.
Thanks, Alice, for your presentation. I was struck very early on when you were talking about the medicalisation of childbirth, how the professionalisation of so much of our lives now removes all of those intimate sort of family and household rituals. I was thinking particularly around death. You know, certainly in Australia, often the first time the priest learns that someone has died is when the phone call comes from the funeral director. And all of those sort of family rituals and household rituals, like gathering in the presence of the body and all of that sort of stuff, we've just lost the opportunity for all of that now. So it's a similar sort of path with the professionalisation of all of these things. Sort of cuts the church out in some ways.
No, I definitely think that's a really true point, and I think even more giving something to reflect upon is how during these past few years of pandemic that's even been drawn in even more. When I was back in parish, I was also for one day a week a maternity chaplain, so I covered the special care wards and maternity wards during the time when, apart from when you were actually in the birthing room, there was nobody allowed in with you. And to see and to journey with women going through that completely on their own with no support, even from their other halves or partners, was just, I think we really will see the impact of those years on people's relationships and people's relationships with their children, because just such a difficult time to be in hospital for any time up to a week or two, completely isolated. So I think the work that the church could put into healing some of those very, very early experiences could be priceless, really. But yeah, I think just to get back to your point, the lack of focus on the community and the focus now on specialization and professionals really has impacted birth quite a lot. Like, obviously for good, like we no longer live in a world where a good percentage of people are not expected to survive childbirth, and so that's only a good thing. But at the same time, like now we're through that time of transition and the majority of births are medicalized, we can start asking what bits of that do we need to patch back into this thankfully safer world.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Firstly, thank you to Alice for such a wonderful and thought-provoking and deep presentation, and to those who've participated in the discussion. I'm mindful, however, that our time of meeting is coming towards its close. Before we finish, it wouldn't be a liturgical function without some announcements. And so I would like to invite Michelle to speak about two very exciting projects that she has underway at present that you might be interested in contributing to. So, Michelle, over to you.
Thanks, Kieran, and thanks, Alice. So lots of what you spoke of tonight is really pertinent to the first one, which is a book of liturgies for Australia. So Tracy McEwen of University of Newcastle and Kathy Lambert, who's connected to Pilgrim College, which is part of the University of Divinity, and myself are putting together a book of rituals/liturgies for Australia, for these sort of liminal times that we don't have things to ritual, or that we don't have liturgies to celebrate or to remember at the moment. It did come out of the AAL conference, and Kieran will be sending out some information about that with the newsletter. So if you've got any questions, I'd love to hear them, or if you'd like to contribute, that would be great too. My email details will be on the call for papers. The second piece of research that I'm working on at the moment is I'm calling "What Are You Wearing?" So I'm thinking about people who wear liturgical robes on Facebook and what that means. So if you have a picture on Facebook of yourself wearing liturgical robes, or you know someone, I want to talk to them, I want to interview them. I think Kieran's going to send that out too. So again, get in contact with me. I would love to interview people, and I have ethics approval and all things for that. So that would be really good. And the third thing, so I've just agreed to help Brian Cones with the editing for the Australian Journal of Liturgy. I will be the book review editor. So if you've read a good liturgy book and you'd like to write a review, get in contact with me again. So just talk to me. Everyone talk to me, I think, is the message here. And I will put my email or one of my emails in the chat. So if you wanted to get in contact with me.
Thank you, Michelle. That's very exciting. And it's so wonderful that our online conference in January has proven so fruitful. It's a really, really wonderful thing. Our next chapter meeting is going to be something a little bit different. For the first time in nearly 3 years, we will gather in person. And so we will be gathering on Sunday, the 27th of November at St Monica's Church in Moonee Ponds. And around 4 o'clock, we will have Vespers or some form of evening prayer. And we'll follow that with social time and dinner. Everybody's welcome. If you think there's somebody who should be part of AAL who isn't, and you think they'd be more persuaded by an in-person gathering, this is your chance. We'd be really delighted to welcome them.
Kieran, that day is the opening ceremony of the Congress of the Humanities of Arts and Social Sciences. So can we just I think they're just doing something in the evening, but if we could factor that in, that would be great. Sure.
I also have to factor whether I can get down to Wangaratta in a reasonable time frame without crashing my car. Tentatively 4 p.m. on the 27th of November, which is also the first Sunday of Advent, a great day of new beginnings. Before we go our ways, let us pray. God of love, help us to know the love from which we come, so that we may learn more of the love to which we go, and in that love daily abiding, forever live with you. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.